The big return pop remains one of the greatest pleasures in all of wrestling, even if WWE's propensity to spoil comebacks by advertising them ahead of time does dull their impact a little bit in the modern era. Regardless, 2018 brought us all kinds of thunderous WWE returns. From Rey Mysterio's Royal Rumble appearance and his eventual re-emergence as a full-time roster member, to the host of familiar faces who've returned as part of WWE's Women's Revolution via, of course, the Evolution pay-per-view and the first female Royal Rumble. These moments are part of what makes the sport so much fun to follow in the first place. WWE understand this, and they'll keep delivering them at every opportunity, and guess what? There are a host of old faces ready to jump back into WWE employment in 2019, though they do vary in feasibility and likelihood. So, who are they? Let's take a look. I'm Andy for WhatCulture Wrestling, and here are 10 big WWE returns that could happen in 2019. Number 10. Kenny Omega. Now, I'm putting Kenneth the Cleaner here at number 10 because while he would definitely be a huge signing for WWE in 2019, his previous run with the company was barely a drop in the ocean. Omega was part of the Deep South Wrestling developmental territory from October 2005 to August 2006, and he has been extremely critical of the time he spent there. Nonetheless, with New Japan contract season up and his deal supposedly expiring in January, there's still an outside chance he could well end up back in the biggest promotion in the world. The rumoured All Elite Wrestling promotion or re-signing with New Japan seem far likelier options for a wrestler who seems to value creativity and freedom above all else. It would be a surprise to see him show up on Raw or SmackDown, but would anyone bet against him succeeding at that level? Only a dafty. Number 9. John Morrison. Impact Wrestling would prove the obvious barrier here. As he's currently known, Johnny Impact re-signed with that promotion back in December 2017, and it's currently unclear when exactly his deal will expire. Nonetheless, WWE's gotta catch 'em all approach should see him float back onto their radar in 2019, and you know they'll try to snap him up should he ever re-enter the free agent pool. A popular ruthless aggression mid-carder, Morrison has improved since leaving WWE, putting forth quality work for Impact and Lucha Underground, but he remains at his core a very similar performer to the one we all know from back in the day. He's all about athleticism and, of course, being a downright sexy beast. Now, his character work isn't as elite, but we all know he can wrestle, and he'd make a welcome return. Number 8. Melina. Widely tipped for an appearance at WWE Evolution back in October, Melina unfortunately wasn't on the historic first ever all-women's pay-per-view. She has, however, spoken openly on her desire to return to the company in some capacity, and given that she's been semi-active on the Australian Indies of all places in 2018, she could conceivably wrestle for WWE again. Given her popularity in her heyday and her openness towards coming back, it would be cool to see Melina re-emerge on Raw or SmackDown, whether as a full-timer or a cameo maker. She's an important part of the company's recent history, and it seems crazy that she hasn't been brought back as part of the Women's Revolution, particularly when considering just how many of her peers have re-emerged over the past year or so. Number 7. Cody Rhodes. As is the case with Kenny Omega, All Elite Wrestling and or a full-time New Japan contract are Cody's most likely outcomes in 2018, but there is still a chance he could end up back on WWE's books after Japan, and that's why he is included here. Major changes would need to be made in order to ensure Cody actually signed. The guy valued himself way higher than the goofy Stardust gimmick towards the end of his first tenure, and rightly so. He has since proven WWE wrong for undermining him with a hugely successful indie run, in which he has become one of the biggest game changers in the entire sport, one of All In's major catalysts, and a red-hot global commodity. It's easy to see why WWE might want Cody back. Whether or not he'd want to sign his future away to the company is another matter entirely, however. They burned him before, and he'd effectively be handing WWE complete control of his career, losing his sovereignty in the process. Don't get us wrong, we'd love to see him succeed at the highest level, but they'd need to treat Cody like the megastar he has become. Number 6, the NWO. WWE snuck Hulk Hogan back in through the back door at Crown Jewel, which was, let's be honest, probably about the only crowd in the entire world that wasn't going to give him some kind of mixed reaction after the Gawker scandal. And now, his buddies Scott Hall and Kevin Nash could well be on their way back to the company as well. The New World Order have been linked with a Hall of Fame induction in 2019, and that makes sense. They were, of course, a WCW creation, but they're also one of the most iconic stables in wrestling history. And while all three have made it into the Hall of Fame individually, the group's impact definitely warrants another induction. Now, we don't necessarily want to see any of these crazy old dudes wrestle again, and by that, I mean we definitely don't want to see any of these crazy old dudes wrestle again, but a brief re-emergence on TV to coincide with a Hall of Fame induction does make sense. Number 5, Chris Jericho. Pulling Chris Jericho away from his freelance freedom is going to be difficult, and honestly, if I was Y2J, I'd probably tell Vince McMahon to take a running jump. Short of offering him an amount of money equivalent to a small island nation's GDP, there's no real reason for Jericho to jump back into the WWE machine, but who knows. WWE are loaded as hell these days, particularly after the Saudi deal, so it could conceivably happen. Jericho would be giving up a lot. He's currently the hottest free agent commodity in the sport and a guy with immense buzz for his work in New Japan and elsewhere. Regardless, WWE is still WWE, and his status with that company almost certainly guarantees that he'd be used correctly if they did want to bring him back. It's not as far-fetched as it might seem on first glance. Number 4, Batista. Although Batista returned as part of the Evolution stable reunion at SmackDown 1000, we are still awaiting conversation of his long and mid-term wrestling future. Big Dave has spoken on his willingness to come back time and time again, and had been linked with a match against Triple H. Unfortunately, that the game is now sidelined with a long-term injury means that bout is probably off. But if WWE are keen on booking Batista for WrestleMania 35 as had been rumoured, they could just find a new opponent for him. How about a certain Viper? While his Hollywood career rules out a full-time run, it would just be nice to see Batista back in wrestling and ending his career on his own terms. He is, according to his close personal friend Adam Cleary, a lovely, lovely man, and he was great in that Evolution reunion. Now, there are some obvious concerns when it comes to physicality, given that Batista is almost 50 years old and he hasn't wrestled in well over 4 years. But one match against the right opponent could well be the ticket. Batista is a good enough showman to make it work, and a great layout would help mask any obvious ring rust and, of course, the inevitable physical decline. Number 3, Goldberg. If I can speak subjectively for a moment, I don't necessarily want Goldberg to return to WWE ever again. His last run, for my money, was absolutely perfect from start to finish and delivered that awesome WrestleMania sprint against Brock Lesnar, so it'd be a shame to see any of that sullied by a lesser return. But guess what? The only people who can say yes or no to this are Goldberg himself and Vince McMahon, meaning that we can't possibly rule it out in 2019. The short matches delivered in Goldberg's last run prove that he can still be a thing within the modern wrestling context. On top of this, his post-return promos were absolutely stellar, particularly his goodbye speech after falling to Brock, which didn't even make air. Shameful stuff, WWE. Now we'll conveniently forget about the time he headbutted a door or fell over while trying to knee Rusev for a moment. Goldberg's nostalgic run was fun, and it allowed him to achieve the goal of playing superhero for his son before eventually signing off, having somehow become Universal Champion along the way. Now, if he does come back, he doesn't necessarily need to be pushed to that extent, but if WWE can find a way to bring him back in a way that benefits a younger wrestler who he can put over, it would be more than worthwhile. Number 2, CM Punk. Woo! Okay, get your spicy comments at the ready because I'm about to talk about Chick Magnet Phil for just a second. Now, I don't necessarily think that this return will happen in 2019, and I imagine it's probably one of the last things on Punk's mind at any given time. But you can never say never in this weird little sport anymore. The Ultimate Warrior returned, Hulk Hogan returned just this year, and given the vast amounts of money currently doing the rounds in Vince McMahon's coffers, nobody is ever truly off the table. Cases like Warriors show us that literally any bridge in wrestling can be rebuilt. So while wrestling made Punk miserable, and while he does have an absolute boatload of enemies in high places, there'll always be the possibility of him walking back through the door while he's still fit and able to compete. The fact that this guy's name still gets chants around the world shows there's money to be made with him, and if there's dollars to be collected, the McMahons will never rule themselves out of a potential deal. Punk's declining public image is a concern, however, particularly after his failed UFC run. Would he be welcomed back as thunderously as he would have been a year or two ago? Well, probably not, but the pop would still be pretty damn huge. And number 1, The Rock. It's been too long since we've seen The Rock on WWE television. His last major appearance came at WrestleMania 32, when it was elected that he should squash Eric Rowan in just 6 seconds before him and former rival John Cena fended off the entire Wyatt family. That was over 2.5 years ago, and we're still waiting for his next move in the world of pro wrestling. Now, it was heavily rumoured that Rocky was being pinpointed for a potential WrestleMania 35 match against Roman Reigns. But of course, his cousin's leukemia returning means that that is now impossible. Still, there are plenty of options left on the table for The Rock in WWE, and to be honest, he doesn't even need to wrestle a match. He's one of the biggest celebrities in the bloody world, and his presence is guaranteed to pop a rating no matter what he's doing, whether that means holding a concert with Elias, throwing insults at Baron Corbin, or bantering off with someone from the old days like Kurt Angle.